I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd road.
Just let it in.
Ujaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ujaba.
So I treated myself to a double feature on Saturday. Yes, I have an advanced copy of the digital release of The Last Jedi. I have the Blu-ray coming via the Steelbook from Best Buy on the 27th, but I was able to procure myself a copy of the digital release in glorious high definition, and treated myself to a double feature of The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens on Saturday. And enjoyable, that goes without saying, but made a lot of rather interesting observations and different feelings about both of those movies. All positive, but jotted down some of the takeaways as I was watching the movie that I'll be sharing with you in the latter part of the show this week. Welcome to episode number 14. I am your host, Jon Justice, working on essentially 4 hours of sleep because I had a bout of insomnia last night, but I had a nice long nap when I got home, and I'm ready to talk Star Wars as long as you are ready to listen. And I'm glad that you are here again with the show once again. I want to remind you, you can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find the show on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean. I'm missing one. YouTube, where many of you continue to leave comments, and I greatly appreciate it. Time permitting, we'll get to some listener feedback before the end of the show. If not, then we'll focus on another listener feedback-heavy episode next week. We will be talking about The Last Jedi, especially with the digital release. In the coming weeks, we'll have a lot of content to get to as we'll get the commentary, we'll get the deleted scenes, we will get the behind-the-scenes making of. Really excited to be spending the next few weeks continuing to dive into this movie that I just absolutely adore. And I absolutely have to continue to delete negative comments about in my YouTube page. You may see them if you post comments on YouTube. You probably get the notifications that somebody has posted a message in there after you've posted. I deleted a bunch of them. I've responded to a few. Most of the ones are just so over the top, ridiculous, and irrational. I just don't want to bother with it, so I just delete them right off the page. And it's unfortunate that so many people don't like the movie, and it's fine, to each their own. If you don't like the movie, you don't like the movie. But it's unfortunate that they want to go and try to strip away the joy from the individuals that do like and love The Last Jedi. I don't understand that type of personality. I just don't get it. And this is coming from an individual who is a talk show host by trade. But I don't understand that, man. If you don't like it, that's fine. But don't tell me that I'm a blank because I didn't like it. So we will talk The Last Jedi and some of my observations in watching The Force Awakens leading into that double feature on Saturday. But we do have a number of news items that I want to go over for the show this week. Talk a little bit about the Rebels finale. There's some new content announcements that I want to give my thoughts on as well. So you know what? Let's just dive right into it.
Fulfill your destiny.
Last week, the hour and a half of the final 3 episodes of Rebels wrapped up, and it was amazing. If you're not a fan of Rebels, if you haven't watched Rebels, probably more specifically, I want to talk a little bit of spoilers here, but it was just really, really great stuff. Absolutely Enjoyed it. Thought that Dave Filoni, the director, wrapped up that story so well. Brought me to tears at the end. Got me really excited for the future of animation. The speculation that we're going to be getting a Star Wars Resistance potentially, where we'll get another animated show set between the time of Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens in that, 19-year span? Is that what it was, right? Roughly 19-year span? But it was really, really good. Ahsoka is one of my favorite characters. Hera is my favorite Rebels character. I love Ahsoka, though, and she transcends Rebels simply because she was in Clone Wars as well. Excited to know that she is still a part of the storytelling of what Disney and Lucasfilm want to create, because I think she is such an amazing character. And I'm just really, really excited for what the future holds. We have so much great content that is ahead of us. And I can't wait to continue to listen to other people's thoughts and to share my thoughts of all that content in the coming years. I've got some exciting things planned, and that I really, really am praying work out when it comes to my nerd world and the Star Wars podcast. And I'm making a list of future plans, and I'm talking, a year, 2 years down the line. But I really hope to continue to grow this show and hopefully provide other shows sometime in the future. One of the things about the Rebels wrap-up that I really enjoyed was, and it's like this with most Star Wars, you zero in on what you like, and it really enhances everything. It enhances the enjoyment of other stories that are told. At least it does for me. And what I'm talking about is sort of the emotional aspect of what Rebels brought there in the end. This group of individuals brought together in fighting for Lothal, the story of Ezra, the story of Sabine and Kanan and Hera. It was such an emotional tale, that friendship. And at the end, and again, spoilers here, at the end, to see that Sabine, through the course of the timeline of the original trilogy and the Coda, when they jumped through till after the battle of Endor and a Return of the Jedi, and she's there keeping watch over Lothal because Ezra told her to, and the attack that never came. And here you have this platonic friendship, right? So many people were talking about shipping Ezra and Sabine, and Dave Filoni even talks about this in an interview after they premiered the season finale. He talks about how, I really wanted to establish this strong bond between this male and female character, even though they were close to the same age, without having to take it to a place of attraction between one another. He felt that it was important to establish a strong platonic relationship there. And that's not to say they can't perhaps explore it later on, but we got that emotional relationship with Hera and Kanan. And even then, maybe it was because it was geared more towards children, but I think it was just more of a choice on Dave Filoni's part. Even then, he kept the Hera and Kanan relationship sort of ambiguously connected. Didn't spell it right out until the end when you finally saw them embrace and kiss. And then, of course, we find out, spoilers, she actually ends up having a child of Kanan's. That, of course, raises the question of when did that actually happen. But if you go back and if you watch the stories and you look at the timeline, there were opportunities in there. We just were not made aware of them. I thought the choices that Dave Filoni made with these characters were really, really solid. And in all honesty, it adds to the strength of the emotion of those friendships. And I really, really respected that decision-making, because it would have been the easy route to make it more of a physical attraction, or to play up the emotional physical relationship on a higher level to try to connect those characters in that way. It's more difficult to establish a relationship that is based off of friendship and rooted in that emotion and not a physical attraction. And I thought that he really, really did a great job. And I'm going to find myself, because I already have been, gravitating more probably towards Rebels on future viewings, and even I will the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars is at a bit of a disadvantage simply because there's so many seasons. So, I could sit down over the course of, a month and work through all 4 seasons of Rebels. It would take exponentially longer to do that when it comes to Clone Wars. But I like the stories that were told, the era that it was told, and just again, hats off to Dave Filoni and everybody for creating that series. And I'm really, really excited for what it is that they have in store for the next animated series. Now, speaking of non-movies and announcements, it was announced this past week that the live action show on the Disney streaming platform, which is going to launch sometime mid next year, does have its showrunner, its producer and creator in Jon Favreau. I am so excited to hear this news. I'm not even going to approach any of the controversy surrounding the announcement whatsoever. I just want to talk about how I feel this is a really, really good choice. Obviously, Jon Favreau, having voiced Pre Vizsla in Clone Wars, having been involved with Disney for so many years, having launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man, I don't think it's as widely known that if it really hadn't been for the success of Iron Man, we probably wouldn't have a Marvel Cinematic Universe right now. I mean, Iron Man was not the most prominent character in the Marvel Universe. I mean, people knew who he was, but, he certainly wasn't any of your A-lister Marvel superheroes, and he did such a great job with that. And I'm one of the few people that actually liked Iron Man 2 quite a bit as well. I've been following Jon Favreau's career for a long time. I mean, it's even before the writing of Swingers, and I absolutely love Swingers. His directorial debut in Made, of course, doing the Jungle Book. We all watched that as a family recently. What has me most excited about this, though, is one, it's in good hands, but the fact that we've got the potential for some really dense storytelling. I got on the bandwagon of Game of Thrones way late. I didn't start watching the series until last year. My wife and I binge watched essentially starting from the first episode all the way up until the not the most recent season, but the end of the other season. We had to wait until this most recent season aired and watch that with everybody else. But we basically binged watched Game of Thrones. Really, really enjoyed it. I think some of it was a bit over the top. A bit gratuitous. I'm not a prude by any stretch of the imagination, but, I think a lot of stuff's better implied than it is showing it directly on screen. But, hey, you know what? Again, I really enjoyed it. It just makes it more difficult when the kids are around and we're trying to watch Game of Thrones, right? But what has me excited is this idea that we could get this live-action TV show, depending on what era they set it in, and we don't know yet. But we can get this opportunity to get some really rich, detailed storytelling and character development. Right now, I'm currently in this spot when it comes to Star Wars of really getting into the characters. And it has a lot to do with Rian Johnson and what he did with The Last Jedi. That's not to say that I wasn't before, but my enjoyment of Star Wars shifts quite often. Sometimes I want action. Sometimes I want vehicles. Sometimes I want location. Currently, I'm more in a romance, for lack of a better word, but an emotional place. I want some good, rich storytelling. And that's because of what The Last Jedi has done, because I thought that was really good, rich storytelling, and there was, it was complex, and so I desire more of that right now in Star Wars, and when you look at the potential of a live action TV show, it has the opportunity to do that in a really, really cool way. And it's part of the reason why I'm so excited about the Game of Thrones showrunners doing a series of movies, because they can lend that same type of Game of Thrones storytelling to a larger canvas of feature-length films. I do find it rather ironic's not the right word, but I find it it's curious that the Game of Thrones guys are doing the films, and the Jon Favreau, who's primarily a movie guy, is doing the TV show. But maybe that's by design. But this really has a ton of potential, and I don't really care what era they put it in. I'm more than willing to wait until they go and announce whatever era it's going to be, and then we can dissect it from there. I know some people have been saying that there's a potential they could put this right after Revenge of the Sith, in which case you could get sort of the in-between 3 and 4 timeline that we haven't really explored. We've kind of been at the midway point, and we will be at the midway point when Solo comes out here in a couple of months. That movie starts off when Solo was 18 years old, so that'll obviously be before sort of Rogue One. But we don't have a lot right after Revenge of the Sith. So if you had a TV series that was primarily based on Darth Vader, the Empire that is just now been created, the sort of the buildup of the Galactic Empire, Vader going out and destroying the remaining Jedi because there would have still been Jedi out in the galaxy. I mean, you've got the opportunities for some really, really cool storytelling. We also know that there were a bunch of completed scripts for Underworld, which was slated to be a live-action TV show before George Lucas sold the company off to Disney. Some of those scripts have actually been used in Rebels, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't have the episodes off the top of my head, but I do know that some of those scripts have been used in the past. So whether or not they go back and they use those, my guess would be more than likely not. It really seems as if Disney has a good system going where they are reaching into the now legacy, former expanded universe, and kind of, pulling out little bits and pieces that they want to use and place them in now the larger canvas of the canon. Thrawn from Rebels is a really, really good example of that. So if I had to guess, again, I would guess that more than likely this is going to be fresh new material, fresh new writing, a whole slate of fresh new talent coming in to create whatever story Jon Favreau ends up telling. But think about it for just a moment, and then we're going to move on to one more quick item before we talk about my double feature of the Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. And that is, we've got Rian Johnson's trilogy, right? We've got the series of movies that the Game of Thrones dudes are going to be developing. We now have the live-action TV show. We also have the pending whatever the next cartoon series is. Not to mention that we should still be getting another announcement for a standalone movie. I know that there's a lot of people questioning whether or not that's still going to happen. If we're going to get standalone movies, the Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, there was articles written about how they had a writer for the script and they were moving forward on it, and we were supposed to get an announcement from Kathleen Kennedy over the summer of another spinoff movie, and we never did. It does have me curious whether or not Disney has decided to sort of pitch off the idea of these standalone movies in favor of longer storytelling with these other films that they are working on. I think there's arguments for both. Personally, I like the idea of moving off of the standalone movies. I think in the beginning, if I had to guess, let's just say for the sake of argument that Disney is not going to move forward with further a Star Wars story movies. Okay. If they don't do that, my guess would be that they had initially decided that they were going to go with a Marvel Cinematic Universe style of releasing films, where you have these core movies and the Avengers movies, right? And we have Infinity War coming up. And then you have all of these other movies that are interconnected together. And this was the route that they were going to go because it proved so successful in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Maybe they decided to ditch that in favor of longer storytelling and mythology building. I hope that's the route they went. I've argued several times on previous shows that the problem standalone movies are going to have is they're not going to feed the fandom what it's used to in its typical saga films. We're not having lengthy discussions on Rogue One. Rogue One is a fantastic movie. And actually, there's an opposite. I watched that middle of last week, and actually half of A New Hope, because I kind of watched those back to back. I've been on a Star Wars kick lately. Can you tell? But we're not having discussions about Rogue One, right? My favorite parts of Rogue One, and I'll just go ahead and go there now since we're in the middle of it. Watching Rogue One, my favorite parts of Rogue One is Director Krennic visiting Vader on Mustafar. I love that scene. It's incredible. That scene is just absolutely incredible. The moment that his shuttle arrives and we get that overhead shot of it flying over the lava rivers on Mustafar, absolutely incredible. My only complaint, side note, there's a lot of side notes in the show this week. Only complaint on Mustafar is they changed it a little bit. Mustafar had a lot more lava on it in Revenge of the Sith, and maybe it was not the season. That's my excuse. That's my headcanon of why the planet looks different. But and I guess it would make sense if there wasn't if there was a location on Mustafar that maybe wasn't as didn't have as much volcanic activity as what we saw in Revenge of the Sith. But you can't really if you put the shot side by side of the planet Mustafar from Revenge of the Sith and from Rogue One, it does look quite a bit different. But again, my headcanon says it's probably safer to build a castle where there's less lava, and maybe this was the winter season on Mustafar. That is my favorite scene, and for as strange as it sounds, the scene towards the end of the film when the rebels arrive on the stolen shuttle over Scarif, and they're getting ready to make their way through the shield gate. And Bodhi has to give them the code for the shuttle. And it gets really quiet. You get a little bit of music, and we get a close-up shot of Jin's face. And she pulls out her kyber crystal. And then she tilts her head down with her eyes closed. I mean, almost like she's praying. But and then they go and approve the code. I've always interpreted that as she has a bit of she's connected to the Force, right? Her mom in the beginning says trust the Force. We know now, as Luke explained in The Last Jedi, that the Force is not exclusive to just the Jedi. I always took that to mean she was using the Force. And that one little quiet moment where she taps into this truly special, power. In this moment with this necklace that obviously has special meaning for her because of her mom. For a movie that's got amazing action, that scene and that moment is one of my favorite moments from that film. But that speaks to the larger point that I'm trying to make, and that is I think it's important for these Star Wars movies to have weight to them and for the fans to be able to speculate on them. And if we're going to be saturated, I'm not saying oversaturated, because I honestly don't think I could get oversaturated when it comes to Star Wars. If we're going to get saturated with Star Wars content, then it needs to be meaningful. It needs to have depth. It needs to have questions attached to it. It needs to be building the mythology. And I wonder if Disney is looking at Rogue One, and then they look at Solo, a Star Wars story, and that's going to be a really, really fun movie. But when Solo, a Star Wars story is done, unless there's something in it that we're not aware of yet that lends itself to the larger saga mythology, we're not going to be having any in-depth discussions on that. And this is what drives the fandom and what will continue to drive the fandom for future generations. We who grew up with Star Wars at an early age, having seen the film in the theater when I was A New Hope when I was 5 years old, we didn't have the luxury, and this isn't like, oh, your kids got it so good today. But we didn't have the luxury of having this much content. We didn't have the luxury at the time of being able to get the home release right away afterwards. We had to keep going back to the theater. We had to play Star Wars. It's what made the action figures so important to us as kids. That whole dynamic is changing. And so while we'll pass on our fandom to future generations, I could already tell you in my household, I've got an 11-year-old who likes Harry Potter. He loves Star Wars, but he loves Harry Potter more than Star Wars. And maybe he'll get into the Star Wars mythology, but he loves the mythology of Harry Potter. Now, my wife does too, and so I think that's part of it. But I have a 15-year-old son who likes Star Wars too, but I don't know if he's going to be into it the way that I'm into it or the way that I was at that age growing up. He's at that age where as a kid it was getting close to when the age I was when Return of the Jedi was coming out, and so I was getting older, and things were more important to me, like girls, and I get all that, and it wasn't until later, when I couldn't get a date before I met my wife, that I got back into Star Wars, because I desperately needed a friend, that my fandom kind of started growing again, but I was always a fan, but we didn't have that, so it kept us clamoring and wanting so much more, wanting more movies. When are we going to get another movie? How long do we have to wait? Well, we don't have to wait long now. We're in the middle of the shortest distance between two films that we've ever experienced within the fandom. On top of that, we've got series that are ending, new series that are starting up. And so if Disney wants to keep this beautiful thing that George Lucas created alive, and I think George knew this, they're going to have to fill it with really rich stories that we're going to want to go and spend 45 minutes to an hour every single week on shows like this going and talking about. And if you're pumping out a Star Wars story movies, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, my whole theory could be blown all to hell if they go and announce an Obi-Wan movie and a slate of standalone films. That being said, I do think that what I am on to is the reason why we're getting a Rian Johnson trilogy. It's the reason why the Game of Thrones guys are doing a series of movies. So even if they pump out one-offs that'll just be for pure enjoyment, we are going to get movies that are going to dive into some of the mythology to give us all something to chew on. And that's really what we're talking about, right? Something to chew on, something to speculate over, so that when trailers drop, we go and dissect every single frame. We didn't really do that for Solo. We haven't done that for Solo yet. We didn't really do that nearly as much for Rogue One either, because we knew that we knew what was going to happen in Rogue One, but, Han Solo, he doesn't really play that much into the Force part of it. This is just going to be a fun Star Wars-esque version of, say, Guardians of the Galaxy. I have heard, by the way, if you listen to any of the any other shows, if you watch Collider Movie Talk or Jedi Council, Christian Harloff and others have all said that for those that have seen Solo, A Star Wars Story, it is very good. It's a very good film. Alden Ehrenreich does a good job of playing Han Solo, but the surrounding cast members really bring that movie home. I think, and I mentioned this last week, I think with the teaser trailer for Han Solo, and then we'll move over to The Last Jedi. I think that with the teaser trailer for Han Solo that we got, that was much in the same way that we got that teaser trailer for The Last Jedi. There was not a lot to chew on in that first teaser trailer, at least for me. Luke's line of it's time for the Jedi to end was kind of the biggest nugget that we got in that trailer, and it was a little lackluster. It wasn't until we got that full trailer that I really got super hyped for The Last Jedi, and deservedly so. So I think that when we get that next Han Solo trailer, we're going to get a much better idea of what that movie is going to be like, and people will be more hyped for it than they are currently, right at the moment.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
I haven't mentioned this before, but it is interesting if you go back and watch the full trailer for The Last Jedi. They really told us a lot more than I think a lot of us led on. We thought, and there was there was obvious misdirection in that trailer. There's no doubt about that. But when you go back and watch it, and the hand being outstretched, and Rey, and I played it at the start of the show, but this line, this was in the
place in all this.
This was in the trailer, and we were right that these were separate shots, but they really did kind of show their hand in showing Kylo's hand reaching out to Rey, even though it was two different scenes. We always watch these trailers, think that we're being fooled or there's misdirection, and while they'll reverse some shots for effect, they did that with Rey and the rain. In reality, that trailer was pretty much telling us about what we were going to get with that movie. All right, so I got the early digital release of The Last Jedi. I was right, by the way. It is probably like if I consider the Blu-ray at 100% HD, I would say this digital release, which is why I still go with Blu-rays primarily. I would say the digital release is at 98%. On the dark scenes, you can see a little bit of pixelation, but I'm anal about that, so that's not a huge surprise there. But I made a comment last week about how much I was looking forward to seeing The Last Jedi on my 60-inch, HD TV here at home, in HD, and I was right. The movie has a much different. I actually like the images. I like the film better on my big screen at home than I do in the theater. Now, I mean, given a choice, I'll watch it in the theater. That's how a movie is supposed to be seen, and maybe I need to go to a theater that's got digital projection, because the theaters that I've been going to, during some of the scenes where there's a white background of sky, you can see this. You can see the deficiencies in the screen itself. It really sort of distracts my eye. It looks absolutely gorgeous on my TV, and watching it back to back with The Force Awakens, I was expecting that there was going to be a larger deviation from how clean The Force Awakens looks. I love the way The Force Awakens looks. It's incredibly vibrant. I love the way that J.J. Abrams shoots his films. He dialed back a lot of sort of the stylistic choices that he takes in his movies. Obviously got rid of the abundance of lens flare, which was a smart choice, made it look a little bit more like a Star Wars movie. But if you watch, say, Into Darkness or Mission Impossible 3, you can certainly see that it's J.J. Abrams. And I really thought that watching The Force Awakens and then going into The Last Jedi, it was going to be a little bit jolting getting to Rian Johnson's style of filmmaking. His films have a definite sheen on them. It's got more of a sort of an earth tone than it does sort of the vibrant reds and blues. But it really wasn't nearly as, well, it wasn't jarring at all, but there really wasn't as big of a difference as I thought. They were certainly different filmmakers, but it wasn't all that different. Well, let me put it this way. The difference between watching A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back was way different than watching The Force Awakens and going into The Last Jedi. Which is also, one more quick point, because I forgot to mention this when I was talking about Rogue One. The trailer for Solo looks a lot like Rogue One, in my opinion. So, who knows if that was a conscious choice, but I do find it a little bit interesting that the movie that's going to be taking place right around the same time period of the events of Rogue One will aesthetically look very similar, not just in terms of the time period in and of itself, but just in terms of the way that the film is shot through the lens of the camera. But I was absolutely right. The Last Jedi just looks stunning on my TV here at home, and I can't wait to get my hands on the Blu-ray. All right. So a couple of ancillary things, and then we'll spend the last few minutes of the show this week. I'm going to save, looking at the clock, I'm going to save some of the listener feedback until next week, and we'll do a larger show for episode 115, talking about your feedback and your email. And this will be good, too, because maybe you'll have some time to watch the digital release, which comes out this week, and send in some more messages. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or drop a message on YouTube. And you can also hit me up on Twitter @Jon Justice, specifically about The Force Awakens first, and then a couple of observations about The Last Jedi, and then I want to talk a bit about Rey and Ben. A couple of scenes, and I was just taking notes when I was watching both these movies. At about 1 hour and 19 minutes in, at the end of the battle over Takodana, after Kylo kidnaps Rey, right? Force knocks her out and carries her onto the ship. All those scenes have entirely different meanings now in the wake of The Last Jedi. We'll get into that. But you see a lot of fan art, sort of Reylo fan art, with Kylo carrying a knocked out Rey in his arms, but now it fits. They all have different meaning now. But at about 1 hour and 19 minutes in, there's a shot when they're taking off of Kylo Ren when his command shuttle is lifting off the ground at Takodana. I never noticed it before, but there's 2 or 3 First Order Special Forces TIE fighters, and they're just hanging there. They're just floating right? Like a helicopter would. They're just floating there over the, in the atmosphere above the trees. And then as soon as Kylo straightens out his ship and flies off, they turn to follow him. It looks so cool. I had never noticed it before. And it's not that we haven't seen a TIE fighter float before. We saw one in the trailer for Rogue One that never made it into the movie at the end of the film on Scarif. We see that a little bit in the hangar at the beginning of The Force Awakens when Poe and Finn are stealing the TIE fighter. But just to see them floating there in that moment while Kylo Ren takes off and his shuttle gets into place before they fly off the planet, just such a cool scene. The other observation visually, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more of these as I spend more time with the home release for The Last Jedi, I never realized how much green there was in the scenes when Rey goes to the dark side cave. Okay? Pay close attention. When she goes down and decides to go and investigate the dark side cave before the hut scene with the finger touching, when she walks down and there's the growth that's coming out of the hole that leads down into that cavern, all around there's this really vibrant mossy green that I never picked up on when I saw it on the big screen for whatever reason. But it really popped out. And here in this scene where it's darker, it's the scenery is very, very muted in dark grays and blacks. There's just this smattering of this vibrant green in the background. It just makes for some really just gorgeous shots. And a similar thing takes place at the end of the Canto Bight sequence after the Fathier chase, right before Rose and Finn get thrown off the Fathier there at the cliff. You really pay close attention to the background. I mean, this is a night scene, but the way that Rian Johnson shot it, it sounds odd to say it's vibrant, to use that word again, but it really is. You can see some of the color patterns and of the flora and fauna in the background. The way that The Last Jedi is just one of the most, if not the most, beautifully shot Star Wars movie. I mean, the care that this dude put into this film is absolutely incredible. I can't wait for one day to shake his hand or give Rian Johnson a hug for just creating something so special. All right, so this is what I want to get to. And again, there'll be so much more time to talk about this, especially with the commentary coming out and whatever insight we get there, and with the documentary footage on the Blu-ray that comes out here in a couple weeks. But starting off with The Force Awakens, and I've obviously watched The Force Awakens since seeing The Last Jedi many times, but this time around, for one, the Luke and Han scenes completely took on a new meaning for me of importance. Those had been, up until this viewing, probably my least favorite scenes in those movies. Not because I don't like those characters, but because I've always been, as I've said, of the opinion that I've had my time already with Han, Luke, and Leia. And I'm glad we got Luke, obviously, in The Last Jedi, but I have. We've had our time with these characters. And while I was happy to see them in The Force Awakens, and obviously it's important for Luke in The Last Jedi, they were never of utmost importance for me to enjoy these films because we already had our time with them. So when Han shows up, or when Han's on Takodana and Leia shows up after the battle is done, and they have that first meeting, and he talks about how he saw their son. And then they go back and they have those couple of conversations on Dakar. Those scenes now all carry weight. The scene when they say goodbye now all carries weight, having spent as much time now I have with The Last Jedi. This is what good storytelling is to me. This is what makes The Last Jedi so incredibly special, is that Rian Johnson took these elements that J.J. Abrams made, and even though J.J. may have had a rough idea of where everything was going. It was Rian Johnson who took these moments, zeroed in on them, and then decided to turn them into something that makes The Force Awakens better because The Last Jedi exists. Because those scenes now between Han and Leia, they mean something. There's depth there. We know what happens. We know about what happens with Kylo. And getting to the bigger one for me, all the scenes with Rey and Kylo now take on a drastically different meaning and importance. From the moment they first come in contact with one another to the interrogation scene. If you listen to the commentary, and I think that's where it is, J.J. Abrams talks about how they were a little bit worried during that interrogation scene that it went on for as long as it did. Because he wanted that to go long. That was an important scene for the movie. And obviously it was part of the inspiration for what drove Rian Johnson to go and craft the story that he crafted and what we got in The Last Jedi. Because these were the characters that interested him most. He wanted to see where in his mind's eye, he wanted to know where the story was going. And we know where it went. But the interrogation scene, the death of Han Solo at the hands of Kylo, what Rey must have been thinking, the saber fight at the end, and specifically when, and maybe it did and I forgot about it, but I don't think so. But never had Kylo's words to Rey at the end of The Force Awakens of, you need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force. Never had they carried as much weight as they did this time after spending all the time that I had spent with The Last Jedi. And it's interesting when you hear some of the detractors of The Last Jedi, those who were upset that they focused on Reylo, right? That they focus on the relationship of these two. Those that would argue that romance doesn't work in Star Wars, I argue with it that it does. And then it's because of this relationship between Rey and Ben that this will be my favorite trilogy. Regardless, I trust in JJ. I absolutely trust in JJ with what he's going to do with episode 9. But this is clearly, in my opinion now, man, this is Rey and Kylo's story, right? And because it's Rey and Kylo's story, that moment at the end of The Force Awakens, I never heard anybody complain about it. But you really, even though Rian Johnson wrote the story based on The Force Awakens and JJ probably didn't see it going the way that Rian Johnson took it, you want to talk about foreshadowing. It's funny to me that nobody got upset that your big bad, essentially, even though it was Snoke, but your villain in The Force Awakens wasn't hellbent in a moment of battle with Rey on killing her. No, what did he want to do? He wanted her to join him then. You need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force. You couple that now with what we got in the richness of The Last Jedi. And I'll say it again. This is why this trilogy is more than likely going to end up being my favorite Star Wars trilogy out of all the ones that have been made. All right, that's it for this week. We'll get into more of The Last Jedi next week, and we'll get to your listener feedback. I'll be able to spend some more time with the movie, and of course, like I said, in the coming weeks here, we'll get the home release, and we'll have the documentaries and the commentary and more comments from you. talkshownerd@gmail.com. Drop me an email. Give me your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Thank you so much for downloading the show. I really, really do appreciate it. I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do recording it. And until next week in episode number 115, that does wrap up number 114. Have yourself a fantastic week, and may the Force be with you always.
My Nerd World.